This happened in the summer of 2011. And something I want to clarify before starting the story is that, of all the research I do, the ones I like the least to do are those that take place in cemeteries. I think that this is a place of rest and the dead should not be disturbed. It is something that over time, one realizes. For this reason I stopped visiting cemeteries a long time ago. But at that time I was young and somewhat intrepid. And I liked to feel the adrenaline running through my veins. He also knew that where the most activity is, it is in the area where the children are buried. During those years, I spent some time in the West Blue Valley neighborhood, located in Kansas City, Missouri. And the first thing I did when I arrived was to go see the cemetery. It is a very beautiful rural cemetery, but very messy. There are tombs that are up to 150 years old and obviously much more recent tombs. But as I told you, there is no specific order. For example, inside the aforementioned cemetery, I found a mausoleum where there are only a few coffins, which correspond to the wealthiest people in town. I remember that at that time, I became friends with one of the cemetery attendants. That in fact, he called me several times to help him with some burials. As I told you before, the graves are a bit messy and there are times when, to do a burial, you literally have to step over other graves or climb on them to do the work. Of all the tombs I saw, one caught my attention. It was that of a child who had died almost at the end of the year 1800. I don't remember the exact date, but I do remember that it was a white marble tombstone eroded by time, which looked in a state of total abandonment. It had a fence that surrounded it, which was eaten away by rust. It made me very sad to have seen the tomb like that. But it also caught my attention that, even though it was daytime, I managed to see several shadows among the most distant graves. I asked my friend if he would lend me the keys to come at night and do an investigation with the spirit box. I wanted to tour the cemetery at night and enter that mausoleum or crypt. At first he smiled, but later at the end of the day, between beers and cigarettes, I was able to convince him to give me the keys. Before going to the cemetery, I stopped by a toy store, bought a little car and a windmill to leave it on the grave of that child, who had generated so much pity in me. I remember that at 11:30 I arrived at the cemetery. It was a starry night, beautiful without a slight breeze of wind. I left the toys on the child's small grave and began to take a walk through the cemetery. The night was quite silent. I had my dowsing rods with me. I took them out of my backpack and began the investigation looking for energy points. But the rods barely moved. And the truth is that at that moment I did not see any shadow. Nor did I manage to feel any presence, and to be honest, I felt tremendous peace. I then decided to go to the crypt or mausoleum, where the coffins were. My obligatory pass was to pass by the child's grave. At first I did not give importance to what I was seeing. As I said before, there was not even a slight breeze of wind. But I did notice that the little toy windmill was spinning on its own. And the little car was no longer in the position I had left it. At that moment I stopped in front of the little boy's grave and asked, "You are playing? Did you like what I brought you?" At that moment the small toy windmill stopped, as if someone had stopped it with their hand. I took out the spirit box and stayed a while longer, observing the small grave and those toys that had moved without any explanation. After about 15 minutes, and without getting answers in the spirit box, I decided to continue on my way to the crypt. But when I arrived at the mausoleum, things were different. In that place the peace faded, the atmosphere felt very heavy and a tremendous cold ran through the place. The atmosphere was totally charged, with a very negative energy and vibe. I could even feel an unjustified tension in my body when I enter and am turning on the spirit box again. The silence that existed before is broken by the fall of a jar that served as a vase. "Oh well. Thank you for the welcome," I said in a joking tone. And before I could say anything else, I managed to hear through the spirit box. Immediately, I responded, "I come in peace to ask if they need help." At that moment, another voice, which was completely different from the previous ones, and this time the spirit box was not necessary to hear it. She could be heard saying,
"You have nothing to do here, unless you want to die."
Or at least, that's what I thought I heard. At that moment I, who was illuminating myself with the flashlight, fixed my gaze towards the back of the room, where there was a kind of marble shelf on which there were many more vases. Obviously there was no wind outside, much less inside. And that's where I can see how at first the flowers were moving and then that whole shelf started to vibrate, making the vases fall one by one. The place was not a very large space. There were 2 coffins on each side with a hallway in the middle. I estimate that it was no more than 8 meters long. At that moment I asked, with a raised tone of voice, "Why does my presence bother you so much?" And it was then that I really felt attacked, since in response to what I asked them, I heard a loud knock on the door, another jar being thrown and breaking against one of the walls of the crypt. And what bothered me the most was feeling as if someone from behind was pulling on the shirt I was wearing. At that moment I decided it was time to leave. The atmosphere had become very hostile, and to avoid any damage to my person I turned around and left the place. I had a strange feeling, and the truth is that it gave me a little fear, I won't deny it. It was then that when I left and out of respect, I went to the grave where the child was buried. I shined my flashlight at where the small windmill was, to see if I could see it moving again. And the truth is that it was completely still. "Hello, are you still here?" At that moment it came to me to ask, "If you are with me, turn the mill," I told him. Since everything had gone wrong in the crypt, I at least wanted to leave the cemetery with some good company. I continued to insist in front of this little boy's grave, and asked again, "Did you like the little toys I brought you?" "If you like them, move the mill," I remember telling him. At that moment I managed to hear a laugh, and instantly the windmill started to move. Very slowly, but it moved. I turned on my spirit box and asked him if he liked the gift I had brought him. And finally I managed to hear a clear and concrete answer. I sat there for about 15 more minutes, watching the toy move. Although I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened to me moments before in the crypt. When I returned the keys to the manager and told him what had happened to me, he told me 2 things. First, that child had died of tuberculosis. And the second thing he told me, it was that in that crypt that I entered, no one knows why, but the relatives stopped visiting it and that strange things are always seen and heard inside it. Things so strange that not even the town priest dares to enter. Very well, friends, this is where today's story ends. I send you all a big hug.